So this is Lean Startup Approach, in case you haven't looked at the schedule. And I'm Franz. This is Mike. I'm going to give about a 15, 20-minute intro to Lean Startup principles, and then we'll take questions. We really wanted this to be like an interactive session where you can ask questions, tell us about what you're doing, what you want to be doing, etc. So, but I'll start off kind of give you an overview. How many of you have heard of the Lean Startup Approach before this, besides seeing it on the schedule? Okay, that's great, because this is introductory, kind of what is it, what you might want to know. My goal is just to give you an overview, and so you can get an idea of what it's about. There's Eric Ries wrote a book called Lean Startup Approach that's really good on this. There's a couple of offshoots that are like the Running Lean is another one that has some very detailed approaches to what we're going to be talking about. But I just wanted to kind of get your mind going on this. I'm a software developer by trade, so I work with a lot of people who are trying to do something new. And what we find is a lot of startups fail, unfortunately. You've probably heard this statistic that 80% of small businesses fail within 5 years, and that's very unfortunate. And when you're the one doing the work that never gets used, it's disappointing. So we don't want to be that person. We want to see if it's preventable. Can we do it better? Is there a different approach that helps us? So that's kind of the premise of why we would think of a different concept. And so the first question is, what is a startup? So Eric Ries, Lean Startup Guru, says it's a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So that's our premise. It doesn't really depend on size. We think of startups as being something small. It's a bunch of people working 90 hours a week eating pizza, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a division within a company that's large, but they're trying to do something new, and they have a problem, but they don't have a certain solution to it. If you're building an accounting system, the solution is known. You don't need to, you know that you need to build an accounting system. It needs to do this, this, and this. The need is clearly defined, etc. But a startup is more like, well, will this work? We don't know. And that's what we're trying to solve. So if you think of, besides corporate people, most people working on startups might be entrepreneurs. And you might ask, what do successful entrepreneurs have in common? And one of the things that's surprising is the initial quality of their idea is very poor. It's you almost never get it right the first time. And what makes the distinction between successful entrepreneurs and not is that the successful ones are able to find kind of the zigzag path between where they started and what actually worked. And only in retrospect does that seem obvious. So the idea that startup founders are heroic with a great idea and this linear path to success, they just thought of it and it was genius, I think that's kind of a myth. And so that's kind of the premise we're working on. And so the premise for Lean Startup is that if you reduce the time between pivots, which is kind of the cornerstone, is the idea that you start doing one thing and you switch to doing another. If you can reduce that time, that's what really matters, and that's what will increase your odds of success before you run out of money. So, the traditional model would be you have an idea, you spend all this time building a product, and you see if it works. And you may end up in this mode of achieving failure where your plan's executed successfully. Every step of the way, you meet all your milestones, but the end result doesn't work. And that's what we want to avoid. I'll give you an example that Eric Ries uses, and it's developing a software application that interfaces. And I apologize, I'm a software developer. This is universally applicable, I believe, but that's a lot of where this originated is software development. So I'm going to use that example. If you're building a restaurant or whatever it is, these things, same things will apply. But for now, think of, you have an idea, you spend close to a year doing it, and it turns out no one wants it. So that, you may end up doing that, and that's what happens, unfortunately, a lot. And you've spent all this time building it, you have to throw it all away. Was it a waste of time? And you might say, well, no, because I learned something. That's kind of our last refuge as far as saying, well, it wasn't a waste of time. We wouldn't have found this out about our customers unless we'd done this. We had to do this to learn something. And the scary thought is, well, did you really have to spend a year building the product to do it? And what if you could have, for a software development, suppose you were building this and it interfaced with 12 social networks, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. What if you just did Facebook? The idea didn't work. No one wanted it. Could you have found that out if you just done one social network instead of 12? Do half the time. Okay, well, probably. You probably would have been the same thing. But take that further. What if you didn't build anything at all and you just created a web page that said, here's the description of this, would you like to download it, and put a download button? And you looked at, well, did anyone click it? And if nobody clicked it, that might be a sign that you need to reevaluate what you're doing. So that's kind of the scary thought behind this, is that you might waste all your time on this, and there's a better way to do it. So what's the different way to do it? So that might be a way if you're doing software. Suppose you have a restaurant, and the traditional model might be build the whole restaurant, spend a few $100,000, and you have this new concept that sounds great, all your friends say it's good, and so I'm going to build a restaurant. And you see this a lot, and it may be a complete waste of money. Well, what if you started with a food truck? And there's actually a restaurant close to here that started as Mountain Fire Pizza, like food truck with a trailer, and they built a restaurant. I drove by it on the way here. So this isn't like a hypothetical. This really happens. And I'll take that a step further. What if you want to test it and you come to PorcFest for a week, like all these people are doing? So, hey, you don't have to. I think that's the mistake that I see the most, is that people have elaborate plans and they do them all without kind of taking the intermediate steps and getting feedback. So that's what this is all about. So how do you approach it? Well, there's really kind of two parts. The first is the product and the solution. So do I have a product that's a project that's worth solving? Is it a problem that people have? So usually the solution is not the riskiest part. That you can, if you're starting a restaurant, you can cook food and you can figure that out. If you're building software, you can program it and you can do it. It's, unless you're trying to cure cancer or something really extreme, it's usually solvable. The problem is usually that people don't want what you're doing, and you don't know that. So that's what we find in software, and I think it applies even to restaurants. It might be a great restaurant, you may have wonderful food, but it's the wrong place, or there's something about it that's not right. So do customers want it? Is it a must-have? That's the first thing. Will they pay for it? If not, who will? And can it be solved? As we said, usually it can be, but that's important. If you can't offer a solution, then it doesn't work. So that's kind of the first thing you want to test. And let me talk about that a bit more. There's different ways you can test that. So you have an idea, you think it's something people might want, but you don't know. And how do you reach out to them? So there's kind of distinctions between what you can do. You're at this point where you don't want to spend a lot of money necessarily, because you really don't know. So do you do free marketing? And I put free in quote unquote because nothing's really free. It costs your time. Even if you're doing social media or blogging, there is an investment of some sort in that. Or do you do paid marketing? Do you do inbound marketing, like you're writing blogs doing SEO, putting ebooks, white papers, webinars, that type of thing? Or do you do outbound advertising where you're paying for advertising, cold calling, etc.? That's kind of hard to justify. The one thing that is outbound that's really important is like doing interviews, and you can use that term loosely depending on how formal what you're doing is. But if you want to find out what people's reactions are, and as far as that goes, let me just go to that. You want to test what people react, but you want to ask them what they do, not what they want. And there's an old quote from Henry Ford. He says, if I asked what people wanted, they would have said faster horses. So the modern analogy to that is if you asked people a decade ago and you described an iPhone, or you didn't describe an iPhone, they wouldn't have known they wanted that. Obviously, people do. But so you have to kind of take a step back and think about what are they saying. The most important question is really, how do they currently solve their problem? So you have a problem you're trying to address. What's their current solution to it? What's wrong with it? You also have to remember that people are very nice. If your friends say it's a great idea, they will. That's not sufficient. You should ask them. It's actually valuable to run it by people, but the difference between saying something's a great idea and actually paying for it is a big distinction. So this kind of the concept, the other important concept, so you have the idea of a pivot, which is that you start doing one thing, you do something different. The other very important concept from Lean Startup is minimum viable product, so the MVP. And that would be like this in the software analogy. If you spent 9 months writing a piece of software, the minimum viable product might be just the page that describes it and a download button. That could be the product. And by viable, it means that is it realistic enough that you can accurately test whether people will respond to it and whether they like it. So that's kind of the concept behind that. So when you're testing it in this first phase, you want to see if people have the problem. Does what you want to do, does that help? Do people respond to that? Will they buy it? And you go through that process. You hopefully get a yes. You keep trying it until you find something that people respond to. And keeping in mind that your first idea is probably not going to be the end result. Then you do this minimum viable product and you test it. So there's really like two testing. You test the idea, like, do they even have this problem? And then you test, is your solution good? So you might do the mock-up and see if they respond to that. When you're talking to customers, there's kind of a balance between being realistic. You want to do, like, if it's a software product, you might do a mock-up and say it's a screenshot. If you're doing a restaurant, you might make your sandwich and see if they like your sandwich. So there's a balance between realistic but not wasting time. You want to be able to, what we say, iterate quickly, which is just be able to go through and say, oh, well, that didn't work, let me try this. And so if you're at PorcFest and you want to iterate quickly, you might have a few things you want to try, and you might make one sandwich one day and see, do people like that? And then you might do the next one the next day. Well, that's a bestseller, and go from there. So Running Lean is a book. If you're looking for very specifics for this, it's very good on things. The only other thing I would say on that is crowdfunding is something that I've seen a lot of people doing, where you could do a Kickstarter type thing. And that's almost like an awesome ultimate implementation of this, because if it works, if people respond to it, then you get funded and you do it. If it doesn't, then you don't. And that's kind of the last thing I would leave you with as far as this approach. So what I'm hoping is you guys have startups or ideas and have some questions. So I will see if you guys step up. But go ahead. Sure. Go ahead.
Last semester I was in college and I sold chocolate chip cookies to everybody in my dorm, and I had a pay what you want system. And a lot of people told me that it would be more effective if I charged a particular price and was like very confident about this particular price, because that would make people less hesitant about, oh, what do I pay, what do I do, you know. What are your thoughts about that? Does pay what you want work, and is there a better thing to do, or is it worse, you know?
That's an awesome question. So his question was about, you're selling food, for example. Do you have pay what you want, or do you have a set price? And so you see, like, one of the things that I always try to do is see what everyone else is doing, like not reinvent the wheel except in the part that I want to. And so my first instinct is look at, most restaurants are fixed price. Is that really like a model that can be reinvented successfully? Panera Bread is one that's actually tried that. And so they've actually created like a pay as you want. They've created several pay as you want restaurants. And I think they found it's been moderately successful. So I'll let Mike.
Just to introduce myself, I'm Mike Vine. I'm an early student of Lean Startup and trying to implement it in my business now. But I'm in marketing, so we already would use a lot of the principles that Eric Ries talks about. He's kind of applying marketing principles into the product development process. And one of the things I'd say is if there's any way to set up an A/B test where you try to control for all other factors, and then have one situation where people are paying a fixed price, one situation where they pay what they want, see if you end up with more money one way or the other at the end of the day, and then you have your answer. So I think Lean Startup, a lot of it is about becoming a scientist of the market. I mean, as Austrians, we don't really believe you can be a perfect scientist of the market, and human beings are not knowable that way, but you can set up mini experiments where you try to glean empirical information.
Okay, I just wanted to get your thoughts on how startups, especially lean startups, cope with the initial capital cost to do whatever. Like, so the food truck, you have to acquire a food truck, or if you need an office, you need a space, or like just the setup. I mean, how do you come up with that kind of like capital cost?
Yeah. So the question is capital costs and how do you get started? And I mean, I think almost every startup requires some capital, even if it's no monetary capital, it's your time. So, but I think that's part of the lean startup benefit, is that you're really trying to minimize that, or you're actually trying to maximize what you get out of whatever capital you have. And it depends on what you're doing. So if you don't have sufficient capital, it's hard to predict. I'll let Mike see if he has any thoughts on this.
Well, Reese talks about, many entrepreneurs talk about your burn rate, which means how much money you have in the bank and how much time that's going to buy you based on how much you're spending. So that's a very important thing. I listened to an interview with Jeff Tucker on this podcast called The Economy with Albert K. Liu, which you should all listen to if you're not. And he talks about that with Liberty.me. Basically, you can have a great product, but if you run out of money, you're dead. So you have to make sure that you can get launched within that window and just calculate what that window is.
Are you guys familiar with design methodologies like House of Quality or axiomatic design? Okay. So what you've talked about so far sounds like a strategic what you talked about so far, it sounds like a strategic overview of how to proceed. Does Lean Startup have methods for evaluating your product and its relationships between its inner workings or anything like that?
I think Lean Startup has some. The other I'm not sure if it's an offshoot actually, but very closely corresponded is Running Lean, is a methodology that kind of incorporates Lean Startup and a couple other Steve Blank's finding customers type thing. And he has some very specific types of ways of evaluating. So there's basically if you go to Google Running Lean, and you can find there's a card type layout that gives you kind of 7 or 8 points of evaluating what you're doing. It's like a business plan. And then, actually, that's a great point. One of the things I didn't talk about was metrics. And you actually, you want to find you want to find all the metrics that are important to you, and you want to have a testable hypothesis for if you've got an idea you want to test, you've got a MVP, minimum viable product. Is it something where you can measure it and say I was right, or that was successful or not? So I hope that answers your question, Mike. Did you?
Yeah. He also talks a lot about small batch production. He uses the example of when you're stuffing envelopes. Most people think it's more efficient to do each process one at a time. So you fold all the letters and you stuff them, then you stamp. But if you end up where there's a typo in the letter, you get to the end, then all of that's wasted, and you end up spending a lot more time. And in fact, the way human beings are, doing one at a time, we tend to take our time more than if we're doing the whole process individually. So that's the main recommendation I heard along those lines.
Hey, I've noticed in both examples you've given, for example, food is an item that you can repeatedly sell to people, so you can rely on consistent revenues from the same people, or items that you can sell in mass through the internet. But how would this work for an item that has to be sold locally and not repeatedly? Like, just an example that comes to mind might be like a firearms shop.
Well, you sort of try to observe the process the best you can. So your hypothesis is people want to buy firearms, and then you figure out what is the minimum you can do to test that. So maybe you start selling at gun shows. You have something different to offer. Even if your market is a one-time purchase, you're trying to identify a market. So you find those first people, unless you have some product that you're going to go through your entire potential customer pool immediately, in which case that's a terrible business, and find something else. So that's the idea. Is you figure out how am I going to start to reach these people. Could even be maybe forming a gun buyers group, or visiting those groups and starting to get a little data, figure out how you can reach these people, or putting up the web. It's very easy online, because you can literally put up what we call a landing page, which is just a one-page website that has a little information and a form, and then start paying. You can pay a little bit for Google Ads, start driving people to that page and see if they sign up, and that really works for any product potentially, unless you literally have to be face to face.
No button to push. There's that term again, crowdfunding. I've seen it elsewhere here, but I don't understand it. Can you explain what that is? Give an example. Is it like starting up a pitch-in, or do people get stock in your company? I mean, how does that work?
Sure, that's a great question. So for crowdfunding, there's many ways to do it. The most popular would be Kickstarter and GoFundMe. I'm sure there's others. And Indiegogo, yes, thank you. So there's slightly different ways they do it. The general concept is that you set a goal that you describe what you're going to do, and so you're going to create guns for or whatever the specific thing is. You're going to build a website for something. Liberty.me, Jeffrey Tucker did one recently. Some of you may be familiar, where they set a goal and say, we're going to do this. We need this much money. If you contribute to it, then you'll get a benefit. So it may be membership in a website. It may be a product that you're creating. And where it varies is that on some services, if you don't meet the goal, they get the money anyway, and you can set that in some cases. So it's maybe all or nothing, or it may be that if you get part of the way, then you'll do whatever you can with that money. But the idea is that people are, you're actually, it's like the ultimate litmus test of market demand, where you say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Does anyone want it? And it's a very, it's a very involved feedback. That's so. Did you have a specific type of project that you were curious about, or?
I'm an engineer and I have an invention, and the first thing I have to do is get a patent, and then I can start exploring marketability.
Okay. That.
But I can't tell everybody what it is, or else they can get my patent.
Well, that's an interesting twist, I think, on the because that one of the kind of the cornerstone of the crowdfunding is usually that you describe what you're going to do as specifically as possible, and so in your case, that's not.
Once I've applied for a patent and have some paperwork saying I'm the first disclosure of this, then I can go out and start.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. There's such thing as defensive. Are you going for a defensive patent, or do you actually want to try to get a monopoly on this idea?
I want to get a monopoly on it.
Okay. Well, that's not going to be popular here. There's something to be. I'm not going to speak from my own because I'm not an engineer or inventor, but I have a good friend on the Seacoast who I'm working on a project with who does a lot of this. He's a serial inventor. And he has some interesting opinions about patents. Basically, if you're going to try to patent something and then assert that patent, you're going to have the legal budget of the equivalent to the people who are going to try to take it away from you. So you're going to go through all the process of patenting this thing, and then best case.
It's not just a few $100 for the cert.
Right. It's the being able to defend that. Right. So his point is, even if the patent system were good, as it stands now, it really doesn't serve the small guy. So maybe it's in your interest to just be first to market and go out there and implement better than the big guys can. Just an idea.
Right. So, and I'm thinking it's a niche idea, and all it would do is give me an edge of my business over everyone else who's already in the business.
Right. Right. The key is implementation, and I think if you take some of these ideas about lean startup, then maybe this allows you to be much more nimble than big companies, which really have trouble executing this. This is a point that Reese makes in the book. They can't iterate quickly because they have so many people to ask and so many people to talk to. So that's a big advantage for us small guys. Yeah. So, well, good luck.
Hi, I'm Bobby Sue. So I missed the beginning of this, and I apologize, and hopefully I'm asking the right question. But I have a cleaning business, and unfortunately I'm a prisoner of the IRS still. I would love to be not paying taxes, and I've entertained the thought of maybe having a nonprofit business. And the young gentleman here brought up pay-as-you-go, and I've always kind of wanted to, pay what you want, yes. And I've always wanted to maybe start by helping the elderly. And so I was thinking maybe to try nonprofit with the pay what you want with the elderly. And maybe if I can't obviously sync my business as well while I'm trying this, and then maybe if I needed to use something like the crowdfunding. Does this sound like any kind of a good direction to start in?
That's great. So the question is, with the cleaning business going to a pay what you want model, and could working with the elderly it sounds like, correct me if a nonprofit as a nonprofit. So That's I mean, I think when you're between, there's a distinction between your motivations as far as business and nonprofit. You still, but even in starting a nonprofit, you still want the motivations. Is it something people really want? Is it worthwhile? I mean, I'm assuming that's the motivation between it with a nonprofit, and along with whatever advantages. I'll see if Mike has any thoughts on this.
First, it's a noble goal to not fund all the criminality that goes on with the government, but it's very risky, especially if you start to make a lot of money. So if you're generally not successful or middling in your business, I think a lot of people can get away with a lot. But once you start to reach success, then all of that, then they come after you. So that's the challenge with that kind of approach. But it's an interesting idea to start a nonprofit. I think first you got to see if the IRS will give you or a 501c3 status, or maybe you do a little initial business and get some donors, and then see if they'll give you 501c3, and they sort of call the shots there. So you're sort of still in tow with the government. If they think that what you're doing is a legitimate nonprofit, then they'll allow you to do it, and then you're dependent on donors. You can't really then just directly take payment like you would for a business. You have to have donors. There's a lot of rules. The compliance on a nonprofit versus an LLC it's a huge chasm. So it's hard to do it that way. I think a lot of people here who've chosen to not pay taxes just go full agorist and say, I'm going to take a principled stand. I'm going to do business with people who understand that, and I'm going to take a risk that if I start to get successful, then the big gang in DC is going to come after me. I don't know, does that help at all?
It doesn't. And do you know what they consider successful?
No, there's no there's no line. I think that there's I think if you make, I don't know what the figure is now, less than 60 a year, then if you do your exemptions right and everything, they usually have to pay you. So I think when you cross that line where they're not paying you, you're supposed to be paying, and then when you're supposed to be paying a significant amount, they know where their bread is buttered, and anyone who's not going to be a good tax slave, they're going to try to milk you. Sure.
Hey, I have something I'm working on that combines. I'm a software guy too, and I've got something I'm working on that combines a little bit of. Sorry, I got something I'm working on that combines, embedded, a little bit of embedded hardware, some software, and then there's the potential for the application of it. I didn't know if you had any advice as to whether it's something. It's something I want people to be able to take a little ownership in. And be able to, so I don't really want to close down everything and lock it down, but I didn't know, there's a few ways I could make money off this. It could be primarily put the money in selling the hardware, maybe try to, license the software, but that I would kind of want more open. Or then there's do I want to just create it and open it up and do it more of a consulting business on how to use it best? Do you guys have any experience? The latter seems like, well, I don't know. Each one would have different application as far as the lean stuff. Oh, so the thing I'm working on is some data recording electronics for race bikes. Okay, so I've got this thing where I want them to be able to kind of make it their own, so their bike can be there. It's not like this closed lockdown thing that they bolt on their bike and take no ownership in. That would be the thing I want to actually differentiate from the other stuff that's out there. But then it's how do you monetize that? Does that make sense? I didn't know if you had anything to say about that.
Sure, that's very cool. I'm not sure I have a good answer to that. Mike probably has a better answer, but I think there's several layers to that as far as what you do, and you can have something just software wise, completely open source and added value services. You think Red Hat Linux and that type of model. I don't really know. I think it's very specific as far as what you're doing, actually, in my mind. And I really don't know where I go with that. I'll let Mike.
Reese talks about leap of faith assumptions. So when you're being an entrepreneur, you're required. There's not going to be an apparent right answer from the outset. So it requires you to make leap of faith assumptions. So you have to do your best, and I think that's hard for us as sort of rational, calculating type people. And I know there's a famous case of a guy, I forgot what part of the brain, one of his lobes, he got brain damage in a particular way, and he could think through, he became very logical, and he could think through problems and talk about all the different options, but he didn't have the emotional drive to say, okay, that one feels right, and I'm going to, so he constantly, every meal he had to pontificate for 2 hours. I find myself doing that a little bit as a logical, analytical person, and I think you basically have to do what you can to gather information and then try to figure the course that you're going to be confident in for now, and then see if it works, and then you can change course. And the only other thing is I'm working with a few guys on the Seacoast on something somewhat similar. It's a hardware startup, speakers, that kind of thing. And we're facing the same, we're sitting around having the very same discussions that you are. It's just, try to be humble, and for me, try to be less scared of opening up, I think, because the worst thing that can happen is you're ignored. So I think you release open source software. It seems to be working. You put yourself out there, and then whether it's service and support or another way, you find a way to monetize that later.
Hello, my name is Dylan, and my question refers to starting up a business, maybe Agorist. My question refers to starting a business without paying taxes, whether it be Agorist or a particular model that allows you to get out of taxes, and which one's best. Maybe worker-owned, employee-owned, co-op type style. Is that one of the best ways to get out of taxes, considering if you do the Agorist, the IRS might come after you? And I've heard there's people like Joe Bannister out there who can beat the system. Is one in court, was a former IRS agent.
Sure. Well, I pay my taxes in case the IRS is listening, so I'm not sure I have a good answer to this. I think that's one of those things that you find your own path. So I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I mean, we're at PorcFest. The official response is you should pay your taxes and follow all laws. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, basically, there's no cheat. I mean, they have us, right now, and I think if you get together with a group of people that are all interested in taking that risk, there's been discussions of different things like a common insurance pool if someone gets pinched, so that you basically all contribute, and if someone gets prosecuted, then you have a fund for legal defense. There's some interesting things that people can start to do that has been discussed in the Agorist literature, but finding a way that the government's going to give you permission to not pay them is not in their interest, so they don't create those. There's a lot of sort of whack jobs out there that want to talk about this is a way that you can get out of paying taxes, and they're all they've been prosecuted or go to jail, or their adherents have. So there's no cheat. It's a risk. If it's a risk you choose to take, then I think teaming up and figuring out ways to mitigate the risk, whether it's insurance or not being as public with your advertising, to being person to person, word of mouth, that sort of thing. Again, it's not a risk that I've chosen, but I very much respect people that do.
Yeah, I would also just say, along what he said, just be very wary of anyone that has a legal theory that's very alternative, that says, it's in the IRS code 100 years ago, it's not authorized that you can collect income tax or whatever. Between theory and practice, is practice meaning how it's implemented in the courts. You're you might have a legal defense, but it doesn't work. So I hate to see people get burned by that.
The law is what the federally paid judges say it is.
I'm not sorry. Great. Well, thank you.
I'm looking to open a bed and breakfast and do alternative currencies with that. Would this be a system? I'm sorry. Would this be a system I could use for that?
That's right. It's funny you mentioned bed and breakfast. I grew up in a rural northern New England, and that was actually, speaking of not paying taxes, that's how a lot of people they turn their house into a bed and breakfast, and suddenly it was a big tax deduction. So, sorry, that's a sidetrack. But as far as lean startup approach for bed and breakfast, that's a great question. So, my thought would be, I guess it would depend on a few things. Do you own the property? Okay, so if you don't own a property yet, then I don't. I'm trying to think of how to test it. Mike might have thoughts. Sure. So if you found a property, for example, that's interesting. So hypothetically, you could do a crowdfunding and say, if we raise this much money, we're going to buy this property and get a stay. You get a night in a bed and breakfast if you contribute X number of dollars, and you get a week if you contribute this. So that would be how you could do that. That's interesting. I don't have experience in that, so I'll see if Mike has any thoughts.
The crowdfunding that I've seen be most successful is where people have sort of a new groundbreaking idea. Not always very groundbreaking, but I think if you just say, I want to start a business that exists, even if it's a special one, it's your business, it might have more trouble on crowdfunding. But yeah, the idea Angela mentioned, maybe renting a property so that you're not beholden to the mortgage. I think I'm work in financial PR, so I actually think buying a property, if you can get a low fixed rate, might be a good idea just on its own. But for the business purpose, renting, see if that area works. That would be starting to implement lean startup principles. Minimum viable product means maybe you don't have to go over the top decorating and making your perfect dream bed and breakfast. You have beds. You make sure that I would say with that, you got to hit a bare, a basic minimum of cleanliness and the look and everything. So that could be good if you move into a turnkey and then start off leaving it as it is and then start implementing small changes rather than doing a big renovation all at once. And it's not perfect science. I've hotelier friends in Portsmouth that do that. They go into a place and they tear it all out and they do a wonderful job. But they had a long track record in that where they sort of know what they're going for. They've done those experiments before. So if you're brand new, going in, testing different things, see what people respond to, pay close attention to Yelp and TripAdvisor reviews. That's your key. Where you'll live or die there. So, yeah, that would be.
Sure. I would the only other thing I'd add to that is that that's a situation where I think having advisors, you could probably find some advisors who've been down that road, and that would be really helpful. If you're buying a place existing, that's not really the lean startup almost doesn't apply because it's a known problem, no solution. They're doing it, and it's a matter of do the numbers work. So, but whatever you're doing, I would strongly encourage you to talk to people who have been down that road before, because there's probably a few things that you always run into doing bed and breakfast, and I don't know what they are, but people who do. So thank you.
Hi, I just came in 20 minutes late, and I was wondering if you could just quickly summarize how you would test the market for, because I know crowdfunding's been brought up. What are some of the other ways, just as a reminder?
Okay, so as far as testing, the minimum viable product is the keystone of lean startup approach, and you want to do as little work as possible to find out whether what you think is going to work really works. And that's the shortest version I can give. As far as how to test it, I would recommend looking at Lean Startup, Eric Ries, looking at similar theories for that. I'll see if Mike has any other summary, but
Yeah, basically, the simplest way to put it is try to put on your scientist hat when it comes to businesses and test things. Don't make assumptions, which is really hard. And I find it in my business, and I've started to implement this in a big way with my marketing practice, where I'm not looking to my own opinion anymore. Even though I've been in the business for 5 years and I feel like I have a right to have opinions, every chance I get, I'm trying to turn to the market and see what people actually want, how people are responding, because we don't really know what where people are in the market. People are different than us, especially if you're in this room. We're all in a vast minority of the general population, probably in terms of IQ, and so you just don't. Hopefully higher, and so you just don't want to make any assumptions. That's the gist of it. Design experiments and execute them.
My name is Todd. I have a music education website, and the most popular part of it is sort of an innovative new way of learning music that I sort of developed. And people have told me that I should get a patent on that. And I'm only interested in doing that defensively, purely. I don't feel like I have ownership of the way people go about things once they see how I do that. But I'm interested if you guys ever applied and received a patent on anything, or maybe anyone else in the room would have any information for me on how that process works. Is it horrifically expensive and complicated and time consuming? Any information?
Yeah, please. My dad's a physician, a medical inventor, and he's gone through the patent process multiple times. It takes a long time, and I can't give you exact figures, but basically, yeah, it's lengthy and expensive. I think you can put paperwork on file to get that patent pending, and that gives you some protection. But yeah, if there's anyone in the audience that has been through the process,
I have not been through the process.
okay.
One thing I've heard people doing is take photographs and evidence that you've had in prior art. Something called as a colonial patent. You send the letter, you basically put everything into a sealed envelope and send a certified letter to yourself. But it doesn't. I mean, basically, the only thing that's good for is
Right. No, I've heard of it. For copyrights, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, alternatively, you can just send yourself an envelope that's open and you can put anything you want in there. Like, that is not in any way.
Right.
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 Where it's pretty cheap to file, and after you file your idea, you get to sit on that for up to a year before you would need to actually file full patent. I believe it's called preliminary patent. So if you're really toying around with the idea, just file that, probably do it on your own, and then no one else will be able to file the whole patent on that.
Yeah.
That'd be the way.
yes. So just to summarize, there's the sending yourself a certified letter with something inside is debatable. Probably not going to be the solution. There's other ways you can file. It's probably beyond the scope of this to.
There's actually a way where you can use Bitcoin blockchain as essentially a trusted timestamp mechanism. You can basically create a document, take the MP5 path or whatever the document, and send a Satoshi to a certain address that has the same path. And you can basically be like, oh, well, I had this path in this document back, 2014
Sure. So the issue is, how can you prove that you were the first one? And someone just said Bitcoin, send a hash, and blockchain. So and another way would be, I mean, if you have archive.org enabled, that might be even a way that's a third party. Yeah. So.
on my website on YouTube and everything. So I mean, I'm not worried that I wouldn't be able to show that I came up with it. It's just that if I had patented, somebody else comes along later, gets a patent, and stops me from using my own idea.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's way beyond my experience, unfortunately, but it's a good thing to. So.
I don't have a question, just a comment. I'm a lifetime manufacturing guy, and the Lean Enterprise Institute.org is a great resource. It's not libertarian, but a lot of creative people doing what you guys are doing, and it's great to know that these principles are being applied in a lot of different ways in a lot of different industries.
Awesome, thank you. Well, you guys have been great. Anyone else with questions? Don't be shy. All right. Well, cool. Well, thank you. Hope you got something out of it.